Good evening. Oh. All right. Sorry, we got a little technical issue. All right. Thank you. Okay, sorry about that. We just had a little technical issue there. Good evening, everybody. It is 5:31, October 26th, and at this time, I'd like to call our annual budget hearing to order. May we have a roll call, please?
Yes, we may. Spencer Anderson.
Present.
Amy Levy.
Here.
Sean Levy. Megan Miller.
Present?
Greg Snyder.
Present.
Joyce Ruff.
Present.
Allison Simro.
Present.
All are present and Sean is absent.
Thank you. Vice President Levy, I think, will be joining us in a little while. He let us know he would be a little late, so awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that brings us to item 1C, approval of the agenda. Would anybody like to make a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
So moved. I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Schneider, second by Levy. Is there any discussion on the agenda? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Are there any opposed? All right. Motion passes, which brings us to item 2A, the budget presentation for the public budget hearing. Ms. Armstrong, whenever you're ready. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you. And I think Dr. Kueser is going to share the presentation as we go through this tonight. As a reminder, this is the annual budget that has been prepared now with the certified numbers from the state and the enrollment counts that were done with the third Friday in September. So if you want to go to the next slide. So briefly to recap what was in the preliminary budget that I had presented on October 5th, and that is going to be the basis of today's presentation, is I want to make sure that I'm comparing your apples to apples so I can really identify what changed and why it changed so significantly since the prelim to the actual budget that's being presented tonight. So when we met on the 5th, we had talked about the challenges that the school district was facing, which was our declining enrollment. And at that point, we were predicting 296 student FTE loss in that 5-year average. And we knew we had health insurance premiums increase of 2% and still doing the 98 2% split with employees paying 2% of premiums and district paying the 98%. That did equate to over an 8% increase over the last 2 years of our health insurance. The assumptions that were presented, as I said, worst case scenario that we will always present, was a $1,250 increase to professional educators. I want to remind everybody that has already been provided to them. They've been getting paid that increase according to their agreement with the matrix that was approved in 2019. So those have already been awarded to the professional educators, and we put in an assumption of a 2% increase for all other staff groups. Okay, so now what has changed since that presentation? Well, the big 3 factors that have changed is our September membership, and that now includes the independent charter school. So Lincoln Academy was required to submit their third Friday counts as well, and that had been kind of held very tightly prior to this. And when the school district received their aid certification and enrollment certification, we were informed on that we have an additional 364.5 pupils or FTEs. And, I know people ask, how's that 0.5? Pre-K programs and non-all-day programs count as less than a 1.0 by DPA standards in the membership. So when we were looking at our membership on the preliminary presentations, we were looking at our enrollment, and that would include summer school. It would include all of our open enrolled students out because a resident district claims those students, and then they make a payment for that. But we did not anticipate the 364.5 that was reported outside of their enrollment here. We anticipated that some of that would shift from open enrollment of students who had already open enrolled out of the district going there to Lincoln Academy. That did raise our membership number up from 6,392 that we projected to a 6,518. And we'll get a little more into that as I go. We also saw decreased reoccurring and non-reoccurring exemptions, and that was due to that TLA enrollment of the independent charter school. Our non-reoccurring exemption primarily was the changes in the declining enrollment exemption, and that increased payment to the state would be the payment that the district is now required to pay to TLA out of our aid. Okay, so to kind of understand this, I did a lot of digging, and I figured if I don't have a full concept of it, I want to make sure everybody else does. So I had many conversations with DPI and the Charter School Coalition to find out what is our difference in the independent charter school versus our open enrollment funding, and how does that come across. So to share with everyone, independent charter schools are included in our school district of Beloit membership count, revenue limit calculation, and our general aid. Open enrollment is also included in all of those aspects, but they are also included in our per pupil aid. Independent charter schools are not included in our per pupil aid. What also is interesting as you go through this process is independent charter schools actually get reimbursed from our state aid. That is $9,201 per student, whereas an open enrollment student is only $8,100, and students with disabilities are $13,000. So as we started going through this process and identifying what effects this has on our enrollment and our funding, the 364 and a half students that TLA reported that belong to the school district of Beloit equals out to a $3,353,765 payment that we owe the Lincoln Academy out of our aid. So that has to be taken out of our budget right off the top. It's a new expense that we had not experienced before. Our open enrollment, we have continued to see that rise, and the incoming open enrollment decline. So with only, out of the 364.5 students that TLA reports, we were able to trace back 244 of those students actually withdrew from the school district of Beloit, and of those, only 17 were already open enrolled out. So we are, the per pupil allocation with the independent charter school and open enrollment, we are continuing to see a decline. As they're not counted in that side, we will be losing a little over $230,000 in the per pupil aid. But we have also, the state budget that was adopted took out the supplemental per pupil aid that we have been receiving in the past. So we are seeing a significant impact on that as well. So I think I jump the gun a little bit on this next slide. This is our revenue limit membership. Again, this includes the summer school and the independent charter school. So you do see this a little differently than what I've presented in the past. I'm trying to identify the population of our revenue limit membership that is actually at the independent charter school, Lincoln Academy. So from this point forward, we will continue to see this separation on my membership report to show how many are actually reported in our district versus how many are attending the Lincoln Academy. As I mentioned, the 244 that we could show withdrew from School District of Beloit. That left 120 that we had to kind of figure out where they came from. And what we were able to determine is those were students that were either homeschooled or in a private school that was not sponsored by the voucher parent choice program. So those are students that have never attended our schools and that we don't get reimbursement. We haven't been given money. They've never counted in our aid, but they are now costing the district out of their aid because they are attending Lincoln Academy. Okay. So what I did here, and I know it's probably really hard to read on some of these, that I took the projection, preliminary budget that I did, and actually crossed out those numbers so that everyone can see exactly where the changes happened. So our resident membership count, of course, as I explained, went up for that 3-year average. So we had anticipated it 6392, and with the inclusion of the 364.5 from Lincoln Academy, that took us to 65.18. Our per pupil amount, of course, stayed the same, but those reoccurring, non-reoccurring exemptions, that went down significantly because our enrollment membership went up. So we were previously looking at $7.5 million in reoccurring exemptions, which meant we would still be able to receive the money for that, down to $3.1 million. So that was a significant decrease in there. Our reoccurring exemptions, we had been trending about $45,000 in transfer for service, and that with the pandemic and the choices people made for schooling last year, that transfer of service actually came in at $23.51.
Ms. Armstrong, I'm sorry, would you have time for a question right now? Board Member Levy has one.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Just for clarification, I believe that I understood that there were two groups of students that were accounted for, homeschool students and students that were enrolled out of district. Am I missing another category?
You had for the 120 that we couldn't account for, those would be homeschooled and not enrolled in the district, but in a private school setting that is not part of the parent choice voucher program. Currently,
okay. Could you explain to us, just to make sure it's clear to me, it sounds like that we are paying the Lincoln Academy out of our aid for students that were enrolled out of district in private schools, but there wasn't a need to pay for students that were homeschooled. Is that correct?
we are paying for all of those students now. If they reside in our district boundaries, and whether they were homeschooled or at a private school not part of the charter, we are now making payments out of our aid to the Lincoln Academy for those students. We did not in prior years get that money.
So in prior years, we did not have to pay for students that were homeschooled, but because now they are at the Lincoln Academy, we now have to submit a payment. And is that the same for students that were enrolled out of district at private schools? Or was the money previously going to the private school?
The only private school that is part of the the parent choice is Rock County Christian, and those were the only students attending there that we would get aid for, and we would have to send that as part of our voucher deduction that comes through on our revenue limit, so that's already accounted for. The homeschooled and the private schools that were not Rock County Christian, if any students came from there, they have not been counted in our membership. Therefore, we've never gotten revenue for them, and now they are being counted in the TLA membership, which gives us that count in our aid, but then creates the payment out as well.
Perfect. So I guess my final question is, were we given notification, I'm assuming this would come from DPI, that, hey, here's a heads up, students who were previously identified as homeschool students or at Rock County Christian, if they're now shift to the Lincoln Academy, you will be paying. Did we get a heads up from DPI?
No, we did not, and that is the question that I asked, is how do I get this type of information prior to finding out about it on October 15th? And they are subject to the same third Friday count, which they have to turn it in the week after the third Friday so that DPI can audit it, and they have assured me there is no way that they can get that information to districts prior to the October 15th certification. So I did ask for that in hopes.
Right. And I lied. My final question on this is it possible that those amounts will change at semester, or are those numbers locked in for the year? For example, if additional homeschool students go to the Lincoln Academy, or from private school to Lincoln Academy, or if they return back to us, is there a refund of the money that came out of our aid off of the top, or are those amounts locked in for the school year?
That is a great question. And the amount that is given to the Lincoln Academy is taken as an adjustment at our last aid payment. So students that are reported on the third Friday of September, then they have to do another membership count or pupil count in the second Friday of January. And so they kind of look at who's where on both of those dates. But any adjustments, we would get proration of they either came back to our district or they open enrolled somewhere else, or now they've gone to Lincoln Academy. That proration and adjustment isn't typically completed until the next school year. So they have to go through their membership audit over the summer and have all their numbers and residency certified, just like we do. And when you have those transfers, you get that aid adjustment. There's a line on our revenue limit sheet that is prior year open enrollment. We would have a similar adjustment to the populations for independent charter schools.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Okay. So again, what we can see here as well is the revenue limit authority for the district, of course, went down as well, and that went down $1.4 million. It is actually $1,416,364, and that is due to the change of residency and our aid calculation and our reoccurring exemptions. So we cannot change that revenue limit authority. That is all the money that the district can get. The only things that would change that would be a referendum or anything of that nature. So that is those are outside of our revenue limit. Okay. We also, with the September or October 15th aid certification from DPI, we saw a decrease in our state equalization aid by $1.47 million. And what that meant is when we take that revenue limit authority, which went down 1.14, now we've changed the amount of aid that we're getting down by 1.47 million. And that then creates what we have the tax levy to our taxpayers. So if I can just kind of remind everyone, when you have your general aid, once you have your levy and your revenue limit, the only change is when the state makes a change and says, oh, we're going to give you more aid or we're going to reduce the aid. That just changes who pays the rest of that levy. So when they cut the aid that we're receiving, that shifted the burden to our taxpayers. So we saw a decline in our revenue limit. We saw a decline in our aid, which then slightly boosted our tax levy on our families. Okay. So as we look at the revenue sources, I want to clarify with people that are looking at the budget publication, the vast difference of saying how much revenue and how many expenditures we had last year versus this year. It is vital to remember at this point, none of our grants or ESSER funds or anything are in this budget. This is truly our operational budget, and those funds would be factored in once we are able to allocate all of our Title I funds and decisions are made with what we're going to do as a community and as a school district with the ESSER funds. So those are not in here as we continue those planning processes. And that is typical in every budget. When we do the budget adoption, we don't build in those title funds. So you will see expenditures and revenues coming up. Like I said, the important part is they always balance each other. So if I'm expecting $1 million in revenue, I'm going to have $1 million more in expenses. So we will be able to tie those together. So the net effect on fund balance and things like that would not change because we would record the same revenue as we're doing expenses, as those are all reimbursable items. You can't have those funds until you spend those funds. Okay. So again, this is just a visual recap of where the school district Beloit is getting their money from. We still receive the majority of our money from state sources. Even when we put the grants in there, typically we would see those funds still coming from the state as my primary funding source for our operational costs. Okay. The special ed, I always hit on this one very importantly, that, the majority of our money, 65% of the revenue for special ed is coming directly from our general fund, Fund 10, which means the reimbursed costs that we are receiving from the state do not equitably represent what we're spending on our students. And so that is my platform of continuing to say we need to, as a state, address the special education funding process for our schools. We are taking that, it actually equates to $9,921,000 that we are taking from General Fund 10 to pay the operating costs for our Fund 27, which is special education. Okay. The expense objects, the one part here I really want to highlight is the substantial increase that I know has been a matter of conversation is in that 300 purchase services. And the reason that number is so much higher is that includes the $3.35 million payment to the Lincoln Academy. It also includes our open enrollment payment out. With only 17 of our previously enrolled, open enrolled students out, now transferring to Lincoln Academy, there's not an impact like we would have expected on a decline of our open enrollment. So we, had always hoped that students that were going to Lincoln Academy would have been students necessarily that were already open enrolled out of our district. Unfortunately, that wasn't reality when we got through the process and were able to see who they actually enrolled as students. So not only are we expecting to pay that $3.35 million to the Lincoln Academy, we still are anticipating $5.8 million in an open enrollment out. And I was able to confirm where we are reporting with our open enrollment out. So at this year's, as of third Friday, we reported 474 FTE students, which equates to 485 students choosing to open enroll out of the district. Last year, we were at 504. The difference in there is graduation or attrition that they've moved out of the district, or the state. So we are seeing our open enrollment in. That went up slightly from 83 last year to 84.5. So the increased cost and what has thrown the budget into a much larger deficit situation of the worst case scenario, again, is that $3.3 million payment that we have to now make to the Lincoln Academy. Okay, the tax levy impact, oh, go ahead.
Sorry about that. Go ahead, Vice President Levy.
I'm sorry. Can you just go back to as you're describing the last part with our decline in enrollment or our enrollment out, is that like 364.5 is students that we have lost to the Lincoln Academy?
Yes,
And then you said we also had the open enrollment out that existed before the Lincoln Academy, and that was how many students?
that was last year 489.
So this year in total, our open enrollment out is like that 364.5 plus that 489?
485, yes.
45? And what you were saying is that we were expecting or hoping or maybe the 485 that were enrolling out, like if they were going to choose to go to Lincoln Academy, then that would be that number.
Right.
But in that 485, that number is made up of students that go to like Rock County Christian School, other
No.
school districts in the,
Yes, other school districts, not, the Rock County Christian schools are the voucher parent choice program, which is different from our open enrollment. But this would be students that are going to Janesville, to Clinton, to Parkview, to
and
Beloit Turner.
And Beloit Turner is the largest of the group that
Yes.
our people open and roll out to.
Yes, and I should have clarified this just so everybody knows. One of my first questions to DPI was, is that 364.5 all of our kids, or is that their whole enrollment? And I was assured it is our students. They reported 383 students, or FTE count in their membership, and I was able to sleuth by my own, looking at various districts, and found the 364.5 was on ours. 9.5 came from Beloit Turner District, 8 came from Janesville, and 1 came from Darien Delavan. So, and that was not readily available. You can't find that. It was literally me going through all of their revenue limit sheets and trying to figure out who else got kids in that block that never had them before. Just trying to make sense of it.
So when we take that 364.5 that we're losing to the Lincoln Academy, and then the 485 that just represents other school districts, open enrollment where our students are going, that's 364 plus 485. That's how many people we actually have out this year.
Yes.
That we're down that much in our enrollment because of.
Yeah, that's the membership count. So like I said, some kids count less or more, but that's the membership effect on both sides.
Okay, and then you said the others, like for the voucher programs, that's a different, like when we think about our roughly 6,500 students, you know, this 364 plus 485 are students that are not with us, and then through the voucher programs, those represent another number of students that are not with us.
Yeah, that's approximately, on average, about 200 students. And that has been pretty consistent across the board. As I said, we only have the one school that qualifies for the Wisconsin Parent Choice Program.
So out of our membership, then, 364 plus 485 plus 200, that's how many that are Beloit students but being served elsewhere altogether.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so the tax levy impact, even with the current situation, with the budget projections, we are still maintaining the same tax levy of $10.10. That is because the revenue limit isn't changing. However, this is allowing us to defease more debt, and we've had the last 2 years, the fortunate ability to prepay that debt, which in bond forms is called defeasance. And we have saved over $4 million in future interest costs by doing the defeasance. So by being able to be consistent and giving our taxpayers a consistent tax mill rate of $10.10, we have been able to save years off of our debt payments on that future cost to the district. Okay. That actual defeasance amount of our levy is approximately $13 million that we will be prepaying off of debt. So that would allow us to cut a significant amount of the interest costs off of that debt while still maintaining our mill rate and tax rate for our citizens. Okay. Okay, and I will preface again, this is the worst case scenario. It is the same situation that I presented the first time I came to the board with the preliminary budget. There are options outside of that.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Ms. Armstrong. Could we have another question from Vice
Yep.
President Levy? Thank you.
If you go back to the mill rate, mill rate analysis, and it might have been like maybe the other slide before that, I think, or no, tax levy, well, somewhere in there. I'm just for some context, I'm trying to understand. I think it might have been the 18-19 school year. There was a school year where we under levied. Is that what happened?
Yes.
Can you explain that? Because I've heard you give an explanation once, and it was about like the compounding
Yes.
problem that it presented, but kind of like for the situation it's creating. Does that apply to the slides that already went back? Can you kind of explain that?
Yeah, that goes into the mill rate analysis that was done when they under levied. That was impacting, they had community involvement that did not want to levy the full amount. And you will see that in your 16-17 year where that mill rate went down to $9.73. And then it rebounded right back up to the $11.54. What that has done is that permanently reduces your levy amount. So each year, we under levied $1 million, but that $1 million doesn't have the same spending costs, but it also isn't recoverable in our revenue limit. As we said, okay, we're going to under levy, then that is, your levy is always based on what your prior year levy was and your expenditures for the year prior. So that is, when a board makes a decision to under levy, that stays with the district throughout time. You can't get that money back.
Okay, so I'm going to, that point is made, I'm going to say again. So I'm looking 15-16, the mill rate was $11.56. And the Board of Education that was elected at the time to make these decisions in 16-17 made the decision to under levy.
Yes.
The result of that Board of Education, as it was composed in the 16-17 when they prepared the budget, in their under levying, if they would have, I'm going to assume it would have been around $11.56, somewhere in that range, if they would have levied to the
max.
To the max.
At their ability.
But in deciding to levy not to the max, for whatever reasons they decided that, it created, the result of that is it's creating what issue then and now for us today?
It is creating a lower base threshold for your revenue limit.
Okay? So part of the reasons that we're having some of the difficulty that we're going to experience in our budget is based on a decision that was made in 16, 17?
That would be accurate.
Okay, so that's a yes.
That's not the only reason, but
But
yes,
it's a
it is a
reason.
very
It's a contributing
significant-
factor.
Yes,
Okay. And so then in 17, 18, if the levy had been 9.73, then the decision was made to levy to the max again?
yes. We've never under-levied after that point.
Okay. But the effect of under levying in 16, 17, explain the compounding part, or how the money that we did not take in, how that continues to affect us to today throughout these other years. Can you make it plain again, please? Plainer.
And
Since we didn't capture all the money that we could have,
Right.
provide education for our students from the tax base, as we go forward, you're
continuing to, what you have as that taxable rate of what we can levy across our group is reduced. And that will, as you talk about spending power and what that costs, that continues to compound. That $1 million is now, next year, depending on CPI, it's now $1.2 million. And then it could go down to $1.4 million in real spendable dollars. So that threshold of what it reduced our district will continue to go as, inflation continues to rise. We're going to see that impact.
Okay, so just another point. So it's around $11.53, so it's $11.73 the next year. When we get to, 18, 19 to 19, 20, we're at $10.30, $10.10. What causes the difference between having $11.73 and then $10.30? Because it seems like the last three are in the $10 range. The ones before were in the $11 range, except for the year the decision was made to under levy.
Right. In those situations, that's when we started defeasing our debt. And I will say that I was here and I did not feel it was in good faith to continue to keep a levy at 1173, which was much higher than our state average and our region average. So the decision with the board and with the superintendent at that time was to put it at our $10 range so that we could reduce it on our taxpayers' burden, but also still take advantage of prepaying that debt. We would have had that opportunity to do that because our expenditures, as you can see, started going down as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Board Member Anderson?
All right. So I got a couple of questions that kind of go into each other. So the amount of money that our taxpayers are getting actually taxed isn't changing from last year.
Correct.
Okay. But a couple slides ago, I just want to make sure it's clarified for everyone. So the state aid, you said, has gone down. So you said then now because of that aid coming down, now it's falling more onto the taxpayer side. So there is no increase on the taxpayers.
That's correct.
Okay.
What it does is it reduces that defeasance. It reduces the amount that we're able to prepay our debt.
Okay, cool. I just want to make sure because
Yes.
Hearing that, some people will probably say, well, they're going to raise my taxes if it's falling more on the taxpayer side. I just want to make sure that it's clear that their taxes aren't going to be raised.
Yes, and I can reiterate that again as well, that the burden on the taxpayer is staying exactly the same no matter which scenario board decides to go with this. That revenue limit, which sets our tax levy, we can't change that. So when those things came out of that, what we are able to collect in revenue is only impacted by our membership and our aid payments. And that just decides who's paying what share. But we have no ability to go over that side of that revenue limit outside of prepaying our referendum debt.
Thank you both. Board Member Anderson, did you have anything else?
No, that is it. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. So I think we're back at the next slide. Again, as I said, this is the same scenario that we presented the first time, but it does have that new $3.3 million cost to the Lincoln Academy figured into this. Now, our board policy states that we will try to maintain a 14 to 25% fund balance. And just for everyone's awareness, 14% of our prior year's expenditure costs minus grants and one-time funds is about $11.3 million. And so in this situation, we would, of course, fall below that 14%. It's a shortfall of about $1.4 million. If we were able to recoup 1.4 and not spend all the expenditures, which we, again, were able to do last year, in that we had approved a $3 million deficit budget, and we did not go into deficit at all. We ended the year basically neutral. We had $118 million to the good. So we are able to try to mitigate those expenditures, and I want to stress that this is a budget that's approved. Any budget that's approved is not the actuals that actually happen. Not knowing this is your best guess as what a budget is, this is your educated guess of what you think is going to happen. And I have always prefaced, I try to be as clear as I can be to say, this is the worst that could happen. And we're going to always strive and continue, as I have for the last 5 years, to keep us in the black and keep us ready. But I don't want these things to come as a surprise if things do happen in that fashion. So then next, yes, I've got all my slides mixed up now. I apologize. These are some considerations that I wanted to, let the board know about. I talked about the fund balance policy between 14 and 25% and what we would need to have in our fund balance. An alternate solution or budget proposal, there's a scenario 2 that I drafted up just for comparison. That would reduce the increase to the other staff to 1.23%, which was the consumer price index for inflation this year. And that would still create a deficit budget of $10.2 million, which would put us at 12.71 fund balance versus the identified that I gave you at 12.26, which was the scenario that was put up from the first time. The other option to consider as well is keeping the professional educators increase of $1,250 that all of them have received and freezing all other categories employments. And that would be any employee in the district that's not in a professional educator capacity, so paraprofessionals, security officers, secretaries, administrators, instructional coaches, all of those would be frozen. And if we were to do that, we would be showing a deficit of a little $8.7 million, which would keep us in our fund balance reserve at a 14.57% reserve. Now, if anyone has questions, I know we've been taking them as we go, and I appreciate that. Be happy to answer any questions.
Let's start with Vice President Levy, please.
So just talk about the fund. I know that the fund balance is a local decision based on our policy, and DPI sets no recommended fund balance, but there's general practices. What is the effect of going deeper into the fund balance and having less than the 14%? What is the impact of that for us?
Yep. When you, as a district or an organization, utilize your fund balance and you dip behind, under the recognized thresholds, it does raise concerns on your bond rating and just on the fiscal wellness of the district. However, your audit is your primary source, and that is where we have continued to see positive returns. So when they look at our audits, they are able to see that the fiscal management is there. But it is not an easy decision or a good idea to continue to do deficit budgets. We want to show fiscal responsibility and preparedness for those. This has been a conversation that's been occurring for a couple of years now. And so it is catching up with us very quickly and predominantly right now.
Okay. And then secondly, a possible answer to this question. What amount is sufficient for this school district so that short-term borrowing for cash flow can be avoided and allows this district to set aside sufficient assets to realize our longer-range goals? I know that might not be politically or practically able to answer, but for this district, what amount is sufficient? I know our policy is set at around 14 to 25, but for our district, what is sufficient so that we, for our short-term borrowing needs and cash flow, and that we have sufficient assets to realize longer-range goals? What is that number? Not a percentage, but like the number based on, like, we have about 18 million in fund balance?
Yes.
Okay, so like what number is that for us? And you might need some other time to put it together, but I'm just trying to understand that.
Right, no, and I completely respect that question and understand the context for it. The district has luckily been in positions where we have not had to cash flow borrow for short-term processes. That is actually due to timing of your aid payments. And so in the situation where we have had to really look at our cash flow, I have typically been, I would say, our payroll and our accounts payable runs every 2 weeks are about $1 million each. And so I have never been less than that available. So I would, it's, your fund balance isn't there every day. It ebbs and flows. And I know that kind of is hard for people that aren't used to the finance side. But I guess the long answer to your question is I want to make sure that I have at least a $2 to $4 million buffer to avoid short-term borrowing.
Okay. I mean, and having that number is helpful because, like, if I look at the slide that shows our projected budget being, okay, because help me understand this thing. So where I see the variance is 10,569,826. If I've got the numbers correct, and I missed part of it, but like 7.7 million, somewhere around there, where we're short. And then there's the 3 million, 3.3 with what's going out to TLA. So we're about 10 in the hole in our budget. And we've got 18 million in fund balance.
We have 20.4 million right now.
Okay, we've got 20.4 million in
That's
fund.
on the slide. He's,
Okay. So then to make up that 10 million that we're missing, we might have to take that out of our fund balance.
yes.
So then we would have 10 million, about 10 million left in fund balance.
Yeah, you'd have 9.89.
We'd have 9.89, and then the answer to like what's sufficient, even though 2 to 4 million is less than 9, and that's less than 14% as we have set by policy. For me, the simple thing is, I got 9, we need 2 to 4, so we're not short-term borrowing, and that's the space in between.
Yeah. To break it down into simple, yes, that's,
Well, yeah, we need the simple. But
I know. And it's that, my mind is always going through all the the
Right.
different scenarios that I have to calculate, but that on principle, and yes, that would be accurate.
Okay, so any other way to fill our fund balance whole than just, I mean, our whole for our budget, for that 10 that we're missing, a little bit more than 10, than to just take it out of our fund balance?
Yes, I would hope to, continue through fiscal responsibility and making sure that we can be looking at budgetary cuts still and just say, okay, we're going to reduce your spending capacity. We need to be conscious of what we're spending out. That's a lot of the conversations that I've had over the previous years is, we don't need to spend just to spend. Make sure you're spending it on things that are impactful for students. So I am, again, hopeful that we wouldn't go in $10 million, but fiscal gov had to present it that way, and yes, it would come out of fund balance if there's no other source for it.
Right, and lastly, so sometimes I think if I know this is bigger than people's pocketbooks, but I like to think about what's the difference between 0 and where I'm at now. If the budget scenario stayed the same, next year, would we be about 10 in the hole? But this time, when I look and see that we only have 9 left, how would we cover what we're missing if we only have 9 left, but we're 10 in the hole at this time next year?
If we kept all parameters the same, you would not be facing a $10 million deficit. You'd be facing probably a 15
Okay.
or higher, because TLA will open another
Right.
group.
So I only have 9.
Yep, and
Now I owe 15.
yep.
That's 6. Where's that other 6 coming from? What do we do to make up the 6 in that scenario next year?
That would be the conversations we're going to start on prepping and identifying our priorities and how we cannot sustain what we're doing currently.
Right, so
But those
we're-
conversations start tomorrow.
Right, so just for people to understand where we are at right now, we're close to getting to 0.
Yes,
Not this year, but next year, our need could exceed what we have.
if we stay status quo and everything, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I
Sorry.
just can't reiterate enough the excellent question and then the response that this is a two-part response. One, tonight, we're setting the budget for that started on July 1st with a whole lot of parameters already set. But as of tomorrow, 12:01 a.m., the conversation switches into what is the budget for 22-23, and it has to start with the vision process at the board and determining exactly what are the parameters that we want to hold true to when building that budget. And once we have those, and with our forecasting tool that Baird is providing, we can look through multiple different priorities and say, what does that look like with these new forecasting tools and contingencies that we put in there.
Right.
So,
And that will include forecasting enrollment as well as charter schools versus open enrollment out. So we will have more capacity to be doing those projections. Sorry.
no, thank you.
Oh, thank you both. And then just for our new board members, it's been the protocol to open up the messages in Google Meets and drop a question mark in there if you have a question. I'm going to give everybody an opportunity to speak, but if you have something to say right away, go ahead and drop a question mark in the chat. All right, and if you need help, just kind of give us a wave and Dan or I will help you out. All right, Board Member Levy, go ahead, please.
Couple quick questions. One, Ms. Armstrong, thank you for putting together such a clear and concise presentation for where we are and for handling these questions well. It is appreciated. On the consideration slide, it has scenarios 2 and 3. Are we missing a scenario 1?
No, scenario 1 would be the one that was actually presented, which was the 2% increase for all employees with the $12.50 already provided to the professional educators.
Okay, and that would leave fund balance at what for scenario? Okay, so I'm going to ask for something on the fly, and if it's not possible, please let me know. Can we somehow project scenario 1? Can we drop it in board docs or project it on the screen? I just would like to visually have those 3 scenarios in front of me, because I would like to know what the fund balance implication was for the scenario 1 that you just described.
And that's on the screen
and
right
then-
now, just so you know, that's the 10.56 million deficit. That is the scenario 1. And with those expenditures and revenues that I presented on the prior screen.
Okay, so this is a little bit of an ask. Could we somehow, and if we got a break for like 5 minutes, that's fine, but get the scenario 1 formatted like scenarios 2 and 3 are? Looks like someone is working on that. Thank you. My other question is, the annual budget meeting is such a big thing, which it should be. Have there been discussions to have quarterly, if not monthly, budget updates so we can get the information from those scenario? I know when the fantastic woman from Barrett came, we said we would be discussing this more, but do we have a more structured cadence for when we're going to have budget conversations?
As far as like the projections and the planning and forecasting, yes, that we've had that discussion earlier in the ability now to do that forecasting. We'll set those parameters. Those conversations are starting, I believe, next week at the Business, Finance, and Operations Committee meeting. But those are also, when we do our financial reports each month, that will show the budget to actuals as well, to so where we are in that budget process. But if you are referring to the planning process of the forecasting, those will be part of my budget work group and also the board committee meeting. And anytime we can provide more updates, but I would assume a lot of those will be coming through the committee report from the committee chair.
Perfect. I just wanted to know what was going to be the vehicle to get the results of those conversations, and it sounds like it's going to be more committee than full board. Is that accurate?
Yes, I think that's the intent at this point.
Okay, perfect. And then my final question, and I will not hold you to this, but I am very curious, so I'm going to ask now. Is it possible that ESSER funds could be used to repay fund balance? And I get ESSER funds is not an unlimited reoccurring thing.
Right.
But when ESSER 3 is approved, is repayment to your fund balance for the operations of your district, do you see that as a valid use of ESSER funds, or is that somehow restricted?
Okay, as far as refunding our fund balance, no, that would not be possible. However, the district could make decisions to spend ESSER funds for funds that are usually and typically district costs. So we would get reimbursement for those funds that could lessen the deficit side on the district's expenses.
So let me ask this. Let's say we go with scenario 1. And that money is going to be withdrawn from our fund balance. I'm assuming it's not all coming out at once. So if I'm understanding you correct with ESSER funds, if we need to take part of that money out of fund balance to keep the district rolling, and then what would have been paid for out of fund balance could be paid for by ESSER funds once they are approved and received. Is that realistic, or does that money have to come out at once, and you believe it cannot be reimbursed with ESSER?
Within the parameters of ESSER, if they meet the guidelines of addressing COVID, addressing learning loss, maintaining your employment statuses, yes, those could be recoded to ESSER funds and not be district expense. But and I'm trying to not simplify this, but it's not like we're going to write a check out of fund balance and say $10 million is going here. What happens is when you spend some money, and if we were to say, okay, we put new social workers in the classroom, in each school to address the mental health needs of our students, then we say, okay, that is going to be something that is addressing COVID-related issues, and we could decide as a district, as a board, and a community to say that is what we want to make a priority with our ESSER funds, and those costs could be taken off the district expense side and reimbursed, paid for by the ESSER funds. That way, that would reduce the amount that I have budgeted for that individual, and it would be coming out of the ESSER funds. However, as you said, and I just want to make sure everyone, those are not reoccurring funds. So if we do that this year, then we do not have the ability to have those funds come in next year, and we're still in the same situation that we are now next year.
No. I completely get that. So let me ask you this. So we're going to need to use fund balance to cover this gap that we find ourselves with. How is that money distributed from fund balance? You said it's not writing a $10 million check. Is it a monthly withdrawal from fund balance to address the bills that are in front of us? Is this a quarterly withdrawal? How does that money from fund balance potentially distributed to help us cover our costs?
Okay, your ending fund balance at the end of the year is where you ended with what you spent. And so it's kind of difficult to think of it. Most of us are used to checkbooks and you have this balance. Well, you don't have this balance sitting in fund balance that I can go to the bank and say, hey, I want to withdraw $10 million. It is as we get our state aid payments, as we get that is what keeps us operational. So we will continue to spend. And our last aid payment is when all of that open enrollment and the TLA payment, all of that will come out. If we have already spent our full budget and that cost is $10 million, then we're not going to get that aid payment from the state, and we have to continue operating without that. When we close our books, the fund balance would be reflective of whatever that shortfall is. But it isn't, fund accounting is not the ability to take a checkbook and say, I have $5, I'm gonna spend 10, I'm overdrafted. It's pretty much where you end the year and how you time your cash payments.
Can I add to that, Ms. Armstrong?
Yep.
And to take the budget year that we just ended, so a year ago, we approved a little over $3 million deficit budget. And so it was through fiscal management and saying, we thought something was going to cost $1,000. We were able to get it for $700, that we were able to save money that way. In addition to when the ESSER funds started to come out, we were having these conversations at the administrative level saying, how best should we be paying for this? And realizing that if we're making a one-time payment or able to take a cyclical payment that would have drawn interest, and we were able to save that money by putting it into ESSER or into other grant funds, we were able to not only make up that $3 million deficit, but we were actually able to put a little over $100,000 back into fund balance. That's it's two parts of the budgeting process. We're giving, this is what the budget deficit looks like. If we had no other options available to us, fund balance is the only place to pull it from. The work that we do starting to at 1201 will help us reduce that budget deficit, hopefully as small as we possibly can, and potentially to zero, depending on what the expenses are and what other funding resources we have available, up to and including ESSER.
No, I appreciate that, and I'm looking forward to those updates coming through business and operations. I feel like I'm missing a part of that title. So my final question is, because I like to put it where the goats can get it. This evening, you are looking for the board to either go with scenario 1, 2, or 3 and authorize that amount in red to be taken from fund balance with the sincere hope and the earnest work to go through it, to reduce that number as much as possible. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Board Member Levy, and thank you, Ms. Armstrong. We have a question from the floor, and I will just remind everybody who's here, that we do have a public hearing scheduled for right after this, but it is, I think, okay to acknowledge a question. So, yeah, we're all good. Do you want to come up to the mic?
Oh, I think I'm on.
Or you're good? Okay.
So
Go ahead.
honestly, I don't understand why we're in debt. Well, you guys, I don't know if I'm part of it, but I do know we all did get new Chromebooks at every other school, and maybe that's also a problem. I'm pretty sure we're all happy with what we had for the iPads since I was in 4th grade. Maybe that's also why we're spending money on things we don't need. That can reduce the price. It can reduce the stress on the city. It can help a lot. We didn't really need new Chromebooks. I understand it was more beneficial for our learning, but we also can do the same thing on our iPad. Plus more, honestly. It was better travel, less expensive.
So for anybody at home who's watching, that's so people can hear on the mic. Yeah, and anybody who's at home, thank you so much for the question. What was your name? Kiera from the floor raised the question about, is there spending happening at the district? And her example was the new Chromebooks that are excessive, that are contributing to the deficit. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Dr. Kieser, did you want to?
So that's a great question, and in part, those funds were approved out of last year's budget, so that isn't included in the budget for this year. The budget for this year is forecasting both our membership, meaning how many students we're serving, how many staff we've currently employed, and then all of the other expenses within that. So there are expenses that we have planned for this year, and some of those may be, to your point, told we're not spending it this year. But to your point, like the Chromebooks and things like that, those were approved last year, and we felt that we could pay for those last year. Now, if we were leasing those, so we didn't own them, we actually used our ESSER funds to actually pay that off, so we wouldn't have that expense this year to help with this. But you're spot on in terms of what are we spending money, forecasting spending money on versus what can we do without. So thanks for the question. That's awesome.
Thank you. And then, yeah, I'll just add to that one of the things that we're going to do here this evening is you've heard people say a couple of times, like as of 12:01 tomorrow, they're going to get to work on next year's budget. So part of the discussion that we're going to have as a board tonight is what are those priorities? Like what do we as a group think is the wisest use of those dollars? And that's an excellent point that you raised. Thank you for that. Vice President, I'm sorry, Ms. Armstrong, did you have anything?
Nope.
Okay, thanks. Vice President Levy?
And just as a bonus, because you are here tonight, like as you hear us asking these questions to understand like how these millions are being spent. So like usually when you come to these public hearings or participate in government, you give your address, like I'm Sean Levy, 2074 Cobblestone Court, where I and my wife are the homeowner. And in December, we get a tax statement. And so the decisions that we are making here will affect that bill that I have to pay for our taxes. And not just myself, but all of the property owners. Tonight, when we make these decisions, we're going to set whether the taxes are higher or lower because it's the amount of money that is needed to provide the children in Beloit an education. So I have 2 children that are at Fruzen, a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old. And so when we make decisions, and other boards will make decisions too, going back, they've made decisions, and going forward, whatever the school board is next year, and people are up for election and other things like that, but like we have to make these decisions every year so that we're providing for the education of the students in the city. And it's a lot of that, the teacher salaries, books and materials that you'll have, all of those things, and all of our employees. Those are the types of things that we're making decisions about.
Thank you, Vice President Levy.
It's good to have you say that because other people don't think so.
Another student from the floor just said that she feels we're doing a great job, which is what Vice President Levy was responding to. Just people can't hear at home when we don't use the mics. Thanks so much for your participation. And then feel free if anybody has additional questions. Okay, so board members, okay, so we left off with Vice President Levy in the chat box. And Board Member Levy, you were good? Okay, so I'm just going to go around the room and just give everybody an opportunity to ask a question or make a comment. You don't have to, that's fine. Board Member Anderson, I'm going to start with you and then just come down the line. Okay, go ahead, please.
I do not have questions at the time. I do appreciate everyone else's questions that they've had. It raises different viewpoints. And thank you very much for presenting this tonight.
Thank you very much. Vice President Levy, did you have anything else?
Just a question for clarification. In the scenarios, the $1,250 has already been provided to our professional educators.
That is correct.
And so we have other classification of employees.
Yeah.
Like-
Our paraprofessionals, our secretaries, our security officers, our in-school support staff
Our own
members.
groundskeeping.
Yeah, all employees that are not teachers or pupil services workers have not received an increase.
Okay, so then, in all the scenarios, the professional educators have already been provided something.
Yes. And there wouldn't be additional two professional educators in any of these scenarios.
Okay, so,
They've gotten theirs, and there's no recommendation
Right.
for additional funds.
and that's an issue that's been for us with compensation and other things, but all employee groups receiving and things being set. And I know the compensation study is still coming. In scenario one, that's 2% of CPI for all other groups.
Yes,
Scenario two, they would get 1.23% of CPI.
yeah, well, CPI, and that's, Dr. Keyser, when you pasted that, CPI should come off of that scenario one. That is providing a 2% increase. The CPI for this year, as calculated by the state, was 1.23%. And that would be, traditionally, the district has given CPI to employees, but they have gone above CPI when it was such a minimal amount, which is why we came up with the 2% to try to be responsible yet responsive. So that 1.23 is the actual CPI
So-
for this year.
Right, so for scenario one, when I look at 12.26 fund balance reserve, and in scenario two, 12.71, and it's about 0.50 somewhere in there, that's the part where you say the difference of giving them what CPI is, 1.23, and 2% is just that 0.54 somewhere in there. So the recommendation in the scenario is that's why what is being suggested there is to give 2%.
Right, because that impact between the 1.23 and 2 is, you don't want to say,
It's all money.
yeah,
But
it's
what
all,
you're saying
it's all money and
is
it
less.
needs to be responsible, but in the scheme of the vast of our budget, it is a minimal impact overall.
And so then in scenario three is the professional educators have already been provided for, and then the other employees would just be frozen. They would not receive anything else. But then that does achieve the 14-point fund balance reserve that is in line with policy.
Yes,
But we can change the policy
Yes.
because a fund balance is set at whatever a district the board chooses in that sense, not to just be willy-nilly with money, but just asking.
no, correct. And I did want to clarify that it says in policy that the ultimate goal of this policy is to avoid short-term cash borrowing, and therefore the end-of-the-year balance should generally be in a range of 14 to 25%. Policy does not dictate that it has to be. There is a final sentence that says, Any amount under 14% of fund balance shall provoke consideration by the board to consider the use of surplus funds to replenish the fund balance. So it is not mandated to have the 14%, but that is generally acceptable of what we have in a policy as our expectations.
And I thank you for that clarification. So first of all, it's a goal,
Yes.
not that we have to have a hard number there. And if we get below that hard number, that hard percentage, it should provoke us to think about things. When I asked a question earlier, you said somewhere between 2 to 4 million is what we need, so that what is sufficient, so that we're not in a place where we're having to do short-term borrowing.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Vice President Levy. And then as we continue, after we have the public hearing, everyone will have a chance to speak to kind of future priorities that we want to hear. But again, just questions and comments on the presentation at this point. Board Member Schneider?
The questions that I had have all been answered at this point. I just want to thank you for your diligent work in providing these numbers and reminding ourselves that this is worst-case scenario, and knowing your diligence in watching the budget, the difference that you've made in past years to keep us on track. I really appreciate that, and makes it easier for us as we look at these numbers to make decisions. So I appreciate your hard work.
Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Board Member Schneider. Board Member Ruff?
I have no questions at this time, but I will say that as I'm listening, I'm becoming more aware of the information I need to participate in decision-making in the future. And you've been very thorough, and you've made it very clear and understandable, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Board Member Summerall.
Yes, it's a very concise and easy to understand. I just have one question, and I don't know if it's relevant, but I was wondering if anybody had the numbers. I know we've already given the professional educators, but what have we given to the other employees in the past 2 or 3 years? Do we have those numbers?
We have been giving CPI, which was over 2%. However, certain groups over the last few years were given over and above in trying to correct some of the pay structures that had not been addressed as we continue to go with CPI. For instance, last year, the board with the budget approved a $2 per hour increase for all secretarial staff because they had not been addressed in over 5 years. The year prior to that was bringing up the paraeducators rate to $15 an hour. So we have been trying to I hate to say this, but onesie twosie each groups, and that's what we're trying to get away from now, and why we have, and I'm not sure if you're aware, being newer to the board, we have a classification and compensation study going on right now that we will be presenting to the board that will look at the classifications of our employees to see, are they truly classified the way that they should be? Are paras actually paras, or are they doing higher level work? And then looking at our compensation structure and really helping us develop our compensation philosophy and a structured pay system that is easily interpreted and predicted for our employees and for the board to be able to follow as long. That is anticipated. We had a December date. We've had some participation issues, so I am thinking it's probably going to be more to January, but I will keep the board informed of that process. And those will be considerations that the board will then have to consider on what we want to do with next year's budget as well.
Yeah, thank you. I just feel like knowing that information now would help us to better evaluate what we have not to look at now, our scenarios. But thank you.
Yep.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you very much, Board Member Summerall. Board Member Levy?
Nope, I'm good.
Thank you. All of my questions have been asked by my colleagues, so I'd like to thank all of you and thank you so much to the participation from the room for raising such important issues. And I do just want to thank you, Ms. Armstrong, for all the work that you've done on this. I know that You've spent many sleepless nights combing through every possibility to do what's best for our district and for our students, and I just personally really appreciate that. So given that everybody's had an opportunity to ask questions and make comments, as I'm looking at our agenda, I'd like to move us forward to item 3A, the public hearing of the proposed 2021-2022 budget. So I'm just going to read the information that has been posted in board docs. So, what's that? Okay, good. And it's up on the screen. You can see as well the way to call in. So we're going to leave sort of the lines open here for a while. Before I start talking anymore, is there anybody waiting currently? I know we have one email, but here, I just didn't know if someone was on the phone waiting. I didn't want to talk. Okay, so just real quick, each person from the public wishing to speak is asked to fill out a comment card and give it to the board secretary, but if you have a question now, we can deal with that now as well if you're here in person. Everybody has 3 minutes to speak. Comments requiring translation will be given 6 minutes. Folks not in attendance may submit their comments through email to public-comment, so public-comment at sdb.k12.wi.us to be read into the record. Comments will be given 3 minutes to be read. Submitting a comment will need to include your name and address along with your comments. For this meeting only, the public will have the option to call in to also make comments on the proposed budget. This option will be treated the same as any other form of public speaking in terms of time limit, stating your name and address before you begin your comments, etc. You will dial the following number when prompted to do so by me when the board gets to this item on the agenda. The host of the meeting will let you into the meeting from the waiting room one at a time. This is like the virtual waiting room. You will not be able to see where you are on the list, but you will be let into the meeting to speak when it is your turn. Once you are let in, you will be thanked for joining the meeting and asked to state your name and address for the record. Please speak clearly so the information may be taken down for the record. You will then have 3 minutes to address the board with your comments regarding the proposed agenda item. When your 3 minutes are up, you will be told your time is up and you will be disconnected from the meeting so that the next person may enter the meeting to begin their 3 minutes. So we will attempt to do this as efficiently as possible. Again, for those listening at home, the number on the screen, you can please dial 1-617-675-4444. You'll be prompted to enter an ID number followed by the pound key. The ID number is 103-597-292-1636. And again, hit the pound key when you're done. It will tell you that you've now entered the meeting. If you could please mute and turn the volume down if you're watching the YouTube stream so that you don't get feedback. And then you can mute or unmute by pressing *6. Lastly, there may be up to a 15-second delay between the meeting or call and the YouTube streaming. So now that we've read that from home, I just want to prioritize people who are here in person and over the phone. It looks like we have at least one comment in person. Is there anybody on the phone at this time? No. Okay, great. So go ahead if you'd like to start your public comment if you're here in person. And as our students are leaving, thank you again for attending. We really appreciated having you all here tonight.
And thank you for the positive comments.
I'm sorry, Mr. Hoy, if you could hit the volume so we can hear you. Yep. Thank you very much, Mr. Hoy. If you could please state your name and address. Thanks.
Sure. James Hoy, 1045 Moore Street. For the past 4 years, the Beloit Education Association has worked with the School District of Beloit to reestablish longevity pay to retain our talented professional educators. This benefit was taken away after the 2010 school year. Staff retention has become an ever-important goal after Act 10 decimated the ranks of professional educators in the years following. The Beloit Education Association has proposed that longevity pay be restored for staff in cumulative $500 increments of 5 years, beginning after 5, 10, 15, and 20 years of service. These increments allow for differentiation among staff salaries and reward those talented professional educators who have chosen to stay in Beloit. Our competitive base salaries, along with this longevity bonus, will retain our talented staff. There's competition very close by at the Lincoln Academy that provides longevity pay for their employees. This further exacerbates the need for this benefit in our district. In order to remain competitive with local districts, longevity pay needs to be restored. The BEA understands that there are financial implications to this decision. The School District of Beloit is facing a budget deficit for this year. We ask that the Board of Education follow through with their commitment to retain staff and adopt a budget for the 2022-2023 school year with longevity pay in place. This will allow our district to achieve excellence by retaining our best professional educators year in and year out. Our students and families deserve to have the best teaching and working with them. Please make this a budget priority and include these incentives for the 2022 and 2023 school year.
Thank you very much for coming tonight, and thank you so much for your comment. Is there anybody else here in person wishing to speak? All right, seeing none, is there anybody on the phone at this time? No. All right, since there's nobody on the phone at this time, let's go ahead and read our email, and then we'll check the phone line, okay? Thank you very much, Ms. Dooley.
Yes, we received an email from Mary Werner, who did not provide an address.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and read it, but yeah, for future reference, we do need to have an address on file. Thank you so much, Ms. Dooley.
You're welcome. For public comment, there is nothing fiscally responsible about a school district that reports a $7 million projected shortfall in early October, only to then change that figure to $10.5 million 2 weeks later. Something is seriously wrong in your district office when this enormous gap exists. It's even worse when taxpayers learn about this in an online news article only hours before your final budget hearing. It makes it feel planned this way. As a longtime taxpayer, I pay attention to the ways I am taxed. How come we have seen budget cuts made long before budget hearings in the past? Only since last year do I recall deficit budgets being the norm. This is the second year in a row that you have robbed your emergency savings instead of making reductions in spending. According to your budget documents online, you are going to take half of your savings balance away. As I live in a household with an accountant, we have discussed how shocking this move would be. I don't understand why this budget has not been balanced prior to the school year starting. Don't you make reasonably accurate projections? According to the Department of Public Instruction's school finance team, a district that does what you are planning will likely see their bond rating lowered and a giant red flag placed upon your books. This is due to an appearance of fiscal mismanagement that should have been previously rectified. You have had plenty of time to prepare for losses in enrollment trends, and especially because of Lincoln Academy. Your answer to trash your bond rating is unacceptable. The Department of Public Instruction told me that you should have a policy that sets your savings account minimum. After getting the runaround, I learned you would be out of compliance with your own policy if you hijacked your emergency fund. DPI says deficits are usually not considered emergencies if there is proper enrollment planning and spending. Your policy talks about the balance to be used for short-term borrowing. You seem to be in a major rut. The Lincoln Academy will continue to legally take from your student body. What will you do next year? The year after? You will likely be broke with a junk bond rating. I would also like to know why I was reading about referendum talk earlier this month in the daily paper. The auditor made it sound like a facilities and operational referendum is coming to Beloit. If that is true, I would like to remind you that we already paid for a huge referendum.
Ms. Dooley, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but that is our 3 minutes of time.
Oh, okay.
Sorry to interrupt, and thank you very much for the comment. Is anybody on the line wishing to make a comment for the for the public budget hearing? At this time, board, we could recess for a few minutes and give people time to call in, or we could close the public hearing. Would anybody be in favor of taking like a 5-minute recess to give people time to call? All right, so at this time, it is 7 o'clock. We are going to take a 5-minute recess. If you are watching at home, there is a phone number on the screen, and I will read it aloud in case there are folks just tuning in for audio. If you would like to call in to make a comment for 3 minutes, you may dial 1-617-675-4444. You will then be prompted to enter the meeting ID number followed by the pound sign. The ID number is 103-597-292-1636, followed by the pound key. If you are watching at home and you don't wish to make a call, but you would like to email us a comment, you may email us at public-comment@sdb.k12.wi.us. So since I took a very long time to say that, the time is now 7:01. We will recess for 5 minutes and reconvene at around 7:06 p.m. Thank you. Good evening. At this time, it is 7:06 p.m. and there are no calls or emails. We are going to convene another 5-minute recess and come back at about 7:11, where we will continue with our evening. All right, the time is 7:12, and we're going to begin to reconvene our meeting at this time. If board members could take a seat now that our recess is concluding. All right, just about everybody is back at this time. We're just going to take a seat and continue with our meeting. I just wanted to check. It looks like nobody else has called or emailed, which brings us, well, I guess I'll just, for item 3A, just to kind of conclude, I would like to thank everybody who participated and those of you who sent in questions about a couple of weeks ago. I think we were able to address all of those on the October 5th meeting. Just a last double check. Nobody's waiting or emailed. Okay, perfect. Okay, well, thank you very much for the public participation. We appreciate it. That takes us to item 4A, which is to establish our levy/adopt our budget. Now, prior to, well, I guess not prior to, but I would like to include in this discussion, we heard a number of times from Ms. Armstrong and Dr. Keyser that they're looking for direction on future budget priorities. I'd like to give everybody an opportunity to share their thoughts now that we've had the chance to comment and ask questions on the proposed budget. So prior to adopting our budget, to put into context what our priorities will be. What's that? Oh, okay.
Let's do one and then the other.
Yeah, to start with. So I think we did do that. So I'll just do a last, is there a last call on questions about the budget? I see what you're saying. Last questions on the budget presentation. Let me just check our chat. Nope. Okay. So then at this time, first things first, I guess, let's take a look at the recommended action. So we saw on our presentation, and on board docs, it's the second to last slide, the different scenarios. So there's scenario 1, which if you're looking at your presentation slide is the third to last slide. It says the fund balance analysis, and it is the farthest rightmost column where it says projected 2021-2022. So that would be scenario 1, and you've got it up there. Oh, perfect. And Dr. Keyser has that up there as well on the screen, followed by scenarios 2 and 3. So at this time, board members can discuss those 3 scenarios, or we could also put a motion on the table for either of those scenarios. So what I'm going to do is just ask that if you would like to ask a question, make a comment, or a motion, that you put a question mark in the chat. It looks like Vice President Levy. Go ahead, please.
So I'm in board docs looking at the recommendation for action. This recommendation for action matches which scenario?
That's a great question. I believe that is scenario 1. Can you confirm that, Ms. Armstrong?
You are actually, the levy would be the same no matter which scenario. That is, the levy that you would be adopting, or the motion to pass the levy is the same no matter which scenario. Your approval of the budget would only change on the expenditure side.
Thank you for clarifying. Vice President Levy, does that answer your question?
Okay, so for tonight, because we have to set a levy, correct?
Yes.
What I'm looking at as recommended action is establish levy, adopt budget. So this is the recommended, where the levy should be recommended at, is what the position of administration. So
Yes.
Right.
That levy, the only way the board would make a decision to change that amount is if you were going to under levy, which we've already discussed is not a good idea.
So then, when we get to like the budget adoption part where we're being asked to choose between scenarios, where does that come at?
That will come in with your approval of the budget in whatever scenario you're choosing. That is all tied into that motion. But the motion, as far as the numbers, do not indicate the expenditure side. Does that make sense?
No, not to me. I'm sorry. I guess what I'm saying is I understand we have to approve the levy. And after we approve the levy, when it gets to like, we're being asked 7 people to choose which one of these scenarios, when are we choosing the scenario?
Can I reword?
Right.
Ms. Armstrong, so give an example. So the recommended motion, what has to be added to the motion for the budget adoption?
Okay. For this motion, you would have to say the Board of Education approves the 21-22 budget as presented in scenario 1, 2, or 3, and the total tax levy of 19.731301. So,
Okay. Now, this is just a different question, but I have to ask it. So, and I understand the giving the place of 7 board members to make a decision, but why does this recommendation not also include which scenario the administration is asking us to approve in our budget?
That's a good question, and typically we don't want to get into the business of the board in terms of putting down the recommendations, because we do know that it is a uniquely positioned scenario in which the board has to set the adoption. So that's why we don't typically put a scenario in there.
So then, like, the levy is going to be what the levy is going to be unless we're deciding to under levy. So I guess for the conversation purpose of trying to figure out where the 7 of us are at with the 3 scenarios that are presented, that's just kind of where I'm kind of determining that I think we're at.
Right, so at this, thank you for clarifying, and then I see Board Member Levy has a question in the chat, but just to briefly address that, in conclusion, unless we decide to under levy, we're going to make the recommended action as printed. The only addition is we have a chance to discuss right now if we want scenario 1, scenario 2, or scenario 3, which I believe Dr. Keyser has back up on the screen for us. So it would be like the Board of Education approves the 2021-2022 budget scenario number whatever, and total tax levy, et cetera, is how we would read it through. So before I move on to Board Member Levy, are you good, Vice President Levy?
Yeah, up until the point where we decide how we're going to, which one of these 3 we're going to pick.
Right, so then we would, so this is the discussion that we're having right now.
Oh, like where I would say I'm for 1 or 3 or 2?
Yeah, did you want to weigh in on that before I go to Board Member Levy?
No, I don't want to weigh in on that just yet.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, thank you. Board Member Levy.
Okay, Dr. Keyser, I want to put you on the spot. So that's my forewarning. Is the administration comfortable with saying which scenario they have a preference for? And the reason that I ask is because my assumption is that conversations with BEA and staff, et cetera, have been happening. And so from those conversations, you've gathered a lot of information that we may not have available this evening. So if the administration is comfortable with stating a preference, that would be helpful. If you are not comfortable with stating a preference, that's fine as well.
Thank you for the question. I am not comfortable in stating a preference, so I appreciate the opportunity to put that on the record.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Board Member Levy. Board Member Semrau?
Yeah, as I asked before, I'm just curious, is there anywhere right now that I can look and see which of our employees received which raises in the past 2 or 3 years? I mean, I think that's something I kind of want to know.
The past budget presentations that we have are on the district website under the business page. So they would have the presentations I've spent with the board. They would not, however, contain last-minute changes that were decided by the board, such as the $2 increase for secretarial, as that was made at the board meeting. So currently, as of whatever time it is right now, no, that that single document does not exist.
Okay.
I will take that as some feedback to include that in my next presentation and some of the projections that we're looking at.
Thank you.
I appreciate the feedback.
Thank you. Did you have any additional questions, Ms. Semrau? All right. Board, I'll just go on. Does anybody else, well, before I go one by one, does anybody else have a question or comment off the top of their head? Okay, so I guess since nobody else has a question or a comment on which scenario, we have to discuss which scenario. So I guess at this time, if somebody has a preference, we could put a motion on the table, discuss it, and vote it up or down. Vice President Levy.
Before we start voting, I'd rather have like a general discussion to see where we're at in consensus.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So having read the policy again on fund balance and seeing that it's a goal and not that it's a hard percent, and reading the language that if we end up at less than 14, then it should provoke conversation. In these scenarios, one question I have is that since all three of these scenarios are provided, then it's a way for it to be budgeted and for us to run the district since they're all here, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a yes. So then when we start discussing it, scenario 3, we can meet a fund balance goal, but we are continuing to not provide different compensation sets for all of our other employee groups. Scenario 1 and scenario 2, it is all real money because we pay the taxes also. It is all real money, but 1.23 at CPI or 2 for the other employee groups. Both of them are less than 14. So that's a little bit of how I'm seeing that. And there are some other things, and this is the first step, and we're discussing this budget, but like I said, there's 22-23 that'll come afterwards, and 22-23 will have to take care of itself as we handle different things. Just kind of eyeballing it, I'm inclined towards scenario 1.
Thank you. And just to clarify, when we make a motion, it does. I don't want you to feel like I was shutting down discussion. I was using that as a way to provoke discussion, but I appreciate that you brought that up because, of course, very necessary thing to do. So we have Vice President Levy has shared a preference with scenario 1. Board Member Levy, you have a comment?
Yes. So when I'm looking at these scenarios, I'm also thinking about our priorities. And so to keep the ball rolling, my preference is scenario 3 because I think it's a bit more of a safeguard with our fund balance. But I would like to set as a priority educator retention, and not just professional educators, but educator more broadly, anyone who is in consistent and regular contact with our students. And I would like for us to prioritize ESSER funds as a way to not pay people what they're worth because we don't have enough in the ESSER funds, but to give a financial acknowledgement of how hard people are working and the different ways in which people have been expected to work during this pandemic. So I'm just going to throw it out on the table. My preference is for number 3, but with the priorities, my 3 priorities are making sure that our schools are safe, and that includes pandemic safe, and that our students and staff are physically, mentally, and emotionally safe in our buildings, student achievement, and then educator in the broad sense, educator retention.
Thank you very much, Board Member Levy. Board Member Schneider.
As I look at the 3 different scenarios and also looking at what's happening with employment in school districts, both in Beloit and around us, my concern with going with scenario 3 is that districts around us have a lot of openings, that we may start losing staff. which is not going to be good for consistency and for health and safety, as well as begin to losing some services for students. People have worked hard and given a lot in the district, so I would think my preference would be to look at scenario 1 or 2, at least that we give them a cost of living increase. I'm kind of going back and forth between 1 and 2, but I think 3 could put the district in a difficult position this year.
Thank you very much for your comments, Board Member Schneider. Does anybody else have a comment or a question? Thank you, Ms. Summerall. Go ahead.
I just want to clarify that last year there was $3 million deficit that was brought to a positive 100,000. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so I guess I'm just wondering, we're going for this, how much are we thinking is gonna, be cut then? Where do we think we can make stuff up? I know you said that starts at 1201, but I guess I'm concerned about the longevity of the funds.
So, thank you for the question, Board Member Summer. So the longevity of the funds, it really is dependent upon which funds you're talking about. So if you're talking about ESSER funds, each one has different sunsetting dates. The longest one sunsets has been published as sunsetting in 2024. Other funds that come from the federal government in the form of title funds and categorical aids are year to year, and they change from year to year. But really it is a combination of strategies, both fiscal management and making sure that we get the best value and stretch the dollar as far as we possibly can. Also, critically reviewing all of the things that we did put in our budget and saying, do we need this, or is this has our priorities changed, and maybe pushing pause on a couple of things. So it's hard to predict exactly how much we would actually be able to save. But as you can see, with only 1 year to go on, in my tenure, we were able to go from $3 million deficit approved budget to not going into a deficit budget by the end of the year. So.
Thank you. I guess, of course, I prefer scenario 1 because I believe our staff deserve that. I am concerned with staying between the 14 and 25, and I'm new. I don't have a lot of experience, so I feel like I'm split here.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Summerall. All right, Board Member Anderson.
I do have a question. I thought we were going to do 2 rounds like we did before of questions. The one question I did have, I was kind of curious about. So if we do go with, so we were talking about bond ratings. What would be the effect on the bond rating versus scenario 1 to 3? So what kind of impact would we see in the bond rating?
Well, that is going to be contingent really on where we end the year. So if we are able to reduce that impact, that it isn't a negative 10 million budget, when we get to our actuals, that's what's going to dictate where we are in our bond rating. So a deficit budget across the board is going to raise the concern when you have the budget. So it doesn't particularly matter so much if it's 8 or if it's 10. As I said, our goal in our policy is a goal. It's not a mandate, but we of course want to be fiscally responsible and keep that bond rating up. So there's no interest in setting that. I also did hand Dr. Keyser a correction. There is one correction on that bond, on the levy motion. As I was looking at it, the final number of 17,420,000 should actually be 17,425,000. That is a typo on my behalf. I apologize for that. And that is in the documents that were uploaded on the revenue limit sheet and the budget publication as well. So the documents are correct. My typo on the recommended action was a typo, and I apologize.
I just updated that. Thank you.
Yep.
No, it's okay. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Board Member Anderson.
So you said before we were at A for our bond rating, correct?
We're at a double A.
Okay. So
Moody's.
So at what point would it trigger us to lower to so we're talking about a deficit. We know that it would have an impact on that bond rating. At what point would we actually see that, is there a number that we are aware of that will trigger that bond rating to come down? Because, let's keep looking at worst case scenarios because
Yeah.
that's what we know of right now.
Yeah, and that's a great question, and I wish I had a number for you. There isn't a magic number that's going to be there. It truly, I can't stress enough, is really where our audited financials at the end of the year are at in that's what our bond rating is going to be based off of, is what did we actually do with the year. We just concluded our 2021 audit, and that will be presented to the board, I believe, in December. So you will see where we ended the year and how that impacted in the positive versus what we had originally anticipated. But unfortunately, I can't give you a number of what is going to, there's a lot of factors into your bond rating.
All right, thank you. With regards between the different scenarios, Scenario 3, I know is going to be the most fiscally responsible currently in our district. But I also do know that our employees do deserve something for all the work that they've done. I wouldn't necessarily, I am torn, and I'm still kind of just trying to figure out which way I want to go. But, and this is part of me thinking out loud a little bit here. But the fiscally responsible side of me says we should do scenario 3, just because it's going to save, 2 million or just right around 2 million. But if we go with scenario 1 or 2, at least we're trying to put that best foot forward for our staff and keep them there, because that is one thing I'm generally concerned about. Is I want to make sure the staff that we have will stay here. We do have a lot of amazing staff, and we need to show them that we do care. And it's a really hard spot to be in, because we do have amazing staff, and I do want to show that we do care.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that, because I think we're all in that same position.
Thank you very much. Just jumping back into the chat. So we have heard from Vice President Levy, Board Member Levy, Board Member Schneider, Board Member Semrau, Board Member Anderson. Board Member Ruff, did you have a question or a comment regarding the scenarios?
I am not as knowledgeable about all the factors that we must consider. But at the same time, I approve of scenario 1 because good staff is hard to find, and we need them. I feel we owe them. And I just feel that we can make it work. And I might learn later that that's easier said than done, but I just, and they've given so much, even with the COVID and all of the expectations and changes that they've had to endure. I guess I would appreciate scenario one.
Thank you very much, Board Member Ruff. So at this time, it sounds like everybody on the board's been able to weigh in. Board Member Levy and potentially Board Member Anderson were in favor of scenario 3. Board Member Schneider, Semrau, and potentially Board Member Anderson were in favor of either scenarios 1 or 2. And Vice President Levy and Board Member Ruff were in favor of scenario 1. Since I'm presiding over the vote, I'm not going to weigh in with an opinion at this time. Does anybody have concluding thoughts or questions on the scenarios that have been presented? Or are we ready to make a motion? What's that? Oh, I'm sorry, I missed your question. Go ahead, please, Vice President Levy.
Yeah, I'm in the chat. So for this scenario, this is, in human service work, I'm an educator myself. Firefighters, police, teachers, nurses, doctors. We are here in Beloit, and as you travel to different communities, there are people who perform these same functions. But it does matter which human beings are helping the other human beings in different communities. When you've got the right people, and it makes a difference, and you can tell when you don't have the right people. Times are very hard. Economically, we're in a situation in our world, in our government, where we don't know how certain things are going to go. But for the people that we do have, to try to demonstrate a commitment to them, that's why I'm in favor of scenario 1. And when I make this decision for other taxpayers that are out there and community members, I'm not making this decision thinking of the millions of dollars that the district has. I'm thinking about the thousands that are in my pocket that I pay personally as a taxpayer. So it is, in the end, as Board Member Ruff said, that, none of us are complete experts to know any of these things, but we have been elected to make these decisions, or appointed by people who were elected to make these decisions. And education has to be given for our students, and the resources need to be there. And part of that is taking care of the people that take care of our children. It's not a guarantee that the people who take care of our children can always be taken care of in the financial ways that they need to be taken care of, but in the limited ways that are in front of us. That is what is being demonstrated in my move towards scenario 1. And it does not mean that other board members, as they've landed in other places, don't want to take care of the people that take care of our children. They're just choices and decisions that have matter and have weight, and there's merit to all of the positions that we take. But there's some different things that we need to do for the situation that we are in. There are vaccine mandates in other districts, and people are moving around. That is not something that we have chosen to do. But employment is a fluid situation because people work because they have to. Some people love to work and some people don't need the money, but people are doing jobs, they love children, and are actually have real life bills to pay. So I think that in that way, to recognize, like I said, the people that we have and the things that they've done, that's why I'm supporting scenario 1, and I'll be ready to make a motion after a while here.
Okay. Thank you very much. Board Member Levy.
I move approval of scenario 3 for the 2021-2022 budget and the total tax levy of $19,731,301, which consists of the operating levy of $1.343523, a non-referendum debt levy of $962,778, and a referendum debt levy of $17,425,000.
Thank you. There is a motion on the table. Is there a second? Is there a second? Okay, hearing no second, the motion does not get pushed forward. Is there any other question, or does anybody else have any questions or discussions, or would somebody like to make another motion at this time?
I move to make the motion that the Board of Education approve the 2021 budget and the total tax levy of $19,731,301, which consists of an operating tax levy of $1,343,523, a non-referendum debt levy of $962,778, and a referendum debt levy of $17,425,000.
Did you mean the 2021, 2022?
21, 22, yeah,
Right.
20, 21, 22, and I guess that would include budget scenario 1. And the way we said that had to be constructed, but budget scenario 1, along with the levy, is the motion that I'm making.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I
Help me say it right.
No, you said it fine. I just, I think I heard different dates, so I just wanted to make that clear. So what I heard you say is that the Board of Education approves the 2021, 2022, right, scenario 1 budget,
That's it, scenario
right?
1 budget, yep.
And total tax levy of $19,731,301 million, which consists of an operating tax levy of $1,343,523, right, $1 million, a non-referendum debt levy of $962,778,000, and a referendum debt levy of $17,425,000, right?
That's the motion I made.
Okay, just to clarify. Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Vice President Levy, second by Board Member Schneider. Is there discussion at this time?
Roll call vote. It doesn't have to be.
Okay, no, I just didn't know if we had to or not. Okay.
Please,
Oh,
roll
okay.
call vote.
All right, I had a feeling. All right, we have a request for a roll call vote. Does anybody else have any questions or discussion before we take said vote? Okay, Ms. Dooley, could we please have a roll call vote?
Yes. Allison Simro,
Aye.
Joyce Ruff,
Aye.
Greg Snyder,
Aye.
Megan Miller,
Aye.
Sean Levy,
Aye.
Amy Levy,
Nay.
Spencer Anderson,
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much. So it looks like the motion passes 6-1. I
Right.
want to thank you to all of my colleagues for the discussion and for moving forward with our budget this evening and our levy. At this time, I'd like to, now I just want to make sure we're okay continuing then the discussion about our priorities, but it sounds like that's going to come at a separate meeting.
At the budget business meeting on the second.
Perfect. Okay, so I apologize for misspeaking earlier. At the next meeting on November 2nd, we will be discussing our priorities for moving forward into the 2022-2023 budget that it sounds like our administration will start working on. I think I heard at 12:01 tonight, so no, I'm just kidding. All right, sounds good. So I apologize earlier for the confusion. We'll move on then. So now that we've accomplished item 4A, is there any other business for the meeting this evening before we adjourn? I would like to just take the opportunity to point out on board docs, it's listed, but I'll just say it out loud for anybody who might be listening at home. Detailed copies of the budget are available for inspection in the district's office at 1500 4th Street, Beloit, Wisconsin, 53511. Also, if there are questions about the budget, please contact Ms. Joanne Armstrong at area code 608-361-4011 or at jarmstrong@sdb.k12.wi.us. And I'd finally like to thank once again our administration and my colleagues on the board for everything this evening. Does anybody else have any other thoughts before or a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion to adjourn by Levy, second by Schneider. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Are there any opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. It is 7:48 p.m. Thank you all very much and have a wonderful evening.